Hi, my name is Jenny McStutz, and I'm the chair of the Franke Honors College Interdisciplinary Faculty. And if you're watching this video, it's because you have questions about being a mentor for an honors thesis project. So I'm going to answer a few of those most frequently asked questions by faculty members today, including what is an honors thesis, or what can an honors thesis be? What is the timeline that I'm looking at in terms of mentoring this project, and what should I expect from my students over that timeline? Very closely related to that, how do I assess an honors thesis? And am I eligible to be a mentor for an honors thesis? So what is an honors thesis? At the U of A, we take a very broad and very generous or open-minded definition of what an honors thesis is. Now, the vast majority of projects still end up being whatever traditional academic research, scholarship, or creative inquiry looks like in the student's discipline. So students actually get honors in a major or a minor specifically. So what that traditional forms might look like is going to vary a lot across campus, right? A traditional journal-ready publication piece in a STEM department is going to look a lot different than a traditional script or piece of creative writing. Still, most projects do fit into those categories, so kind of traditional production for that discipline, but students are able to do service or community-oriented projects and also creative projects as well, regardless of what discipline they're in. Now, I want to put an asterisk on that. If your discipline has rules about what they accept or what they look for in an honors thesis, then your discipline gets to govern that. So, for example, if you are in the public health department, I'm just picking a random department, no judgment to public health here. If you are in public health and you decide as a faculty that you want honors theses to have certain components or even certain formatting requirements, you absolutely can make that decision on your own. The Honors College won't interfere unless we're coming to advocate for a student who wants to do something creative that doesn't fit your usual standards, in which case we would hope that we could have a great conversation about why you have those rules and what ways we might work with those to help advocate for the student. Having said that, it ultimately comes down to what you and the student agree on. So one of my favorite examples is a few years ago, a student wanted to get honors in history and decided that what they really wanted to do was write a play, but they wanted it to be historically accurate. So could they write the play for their honors thesis, but also have to do the historic research to back up the accuracy of the play itself? And they were able to find a mentor who supported that project, who was interested in that kind of creative production, and had them generate both the historical research and the creative product itself. We have also had students in STEM do public education campaigns or art installations interpreting STEM research. So there is a lot of flexibility about what students are allowed to do, as long as you're willing to support that project. And ultimately, it's going to come down to that conversation with you. Now, you might be wondering, but how long is this project supposed to be? You mentioned a play, you mentioned a journal-ready article. How long is the thesis actually going to be? The bottom line is we don't have a page limit answer for you. You can go to repository.arizona.edu. That's the university library's repository site. And one of the things they gather there, there's probably a link on this page already. One of the things they gather there is honors theses. So you can look at recent honors theses in your particular department, or even if you want to search by search terms rather than narrowing by discipline, you can search for things that are kind of in related departments too, and just see what typical lengths are students producing. You'll probably find that many STEM majors are producing a much shorter product because that's traditional and typical of their discipline. There's a lot of intensity of data, there's illustrations. We know there's a lot of actual analysis of that data that goes into producing what is still a relatively concise piece of writing. On the other hand, someone in the humanities or the social sciences might be producing double or even triple the number of pages, but it's a different kind of academic writing and therefore a completely different set of standards. I have seen honors theses as short as 5 pages. Admittedly, that is very rare. That was an artist's statement by a student producing a series of paintings for their thesis. They didn't actually want to reproduce the paintings in what they submitted to the library, but they produced their artist statement describing the work and turned that into the library. that means that there was still a lot of other work, right? Research, creative inquiry, etc., that went into that project, but doesn't actually show up in what's in the library. On the other end of the spectrum, I have seen honors theses longer than 250 pages. Most of those were creative writing, folks who were working at a novel length. But I've seen, for example, a computer science student who included the entire program that he wrote along with the body of writing of the thesis itself. So it looks like a gigantic honors thesis. And of course it was a lot of work. Perhaps a better metric to use instead of page numbers would be amount of time that you're expecting the student to work on this project. So this is going to be less work than goes into a master's thesis, but still more work than you would see, of course, for a single paper for a single class. So timeline-wise, to come to that question, an honors thesis is spread out over 2 semesters, and it's at least 3 units of work in each of those semesters. So a total of 6 units spread out over 2 semesters. By university standards, that means you're looking at approximately 270 hours of student work. How that gets spread out over the course of the 2 semesters, about 135 hours each. But beyond that, how the student is spending their time is up to you and the student. No one expects you to keep timesheets or logs or anything like that. But using those numbers, thinking about a project that a student might work on for an average of about 8 hours a week a semester, can maybe help you decide what an appropriate scope is. So using that time frame, using that timeline, and using the repository, you can also, of course, always reach out to other faculty in your department. Even if your department hasn't had a lot of honors students come through, it still might be worth having a conversation as a department about how long you expect a thesis to be typically. But ultimately, as I said, the form and the length and the scope of that project is going to be up to you and the student to negotiate together, which then leads us into assessment. So let's say you have that wonderful negotiation, you and the student are on the same page the whole time, and then they actually start producing the written work or whatever it is, the product itself. And they're not being responsive to your feedback, or the work isn't at the level that you expected it to be. Well, what does that mean in terms of grading? I don't want to punt and put that back on you, but in reality, that decision is up to you. The Honors College does not have grading policies or rubrics or anything like that at this time. It is something that we are thinking about, whether it would be useful to help faculty with this. But to be candid, we have students graduating in every major and minor across campus. So even just counting majors, we're looking at over 130 different majors. And as you might imagine, one rubric is not going to fit all in terms of how that plays out. It might be possible for us to develop rubrics for academic writing versus creative products versus service products. But even then, students are often merging those forms. They might have a background section that goes with their creative product that is still in the academic writing format. So this is something we're thinking about. And if you have thoughts or ideas about that, we're certainly open to that feedback. But historically, we have never gotten involved in the assessment phase of the honors thesis. Having said that, you are going to have to give the student a separate grade for each of those 2 semesters. Unlike with master's theses or higher level work, you don't give an incomplete or a K grade that rolls over into the next semester. You're giving 2 separate grades. So we encourage our students to have candid conversations with you about your expectations in terms of frequency of meeting, your attitude toward meeting deadlines or failing to meet deadlines, and what you expect in terms of responsiveness to your feedback. My personal experience advising honors theses across a couple of different disciplines has been that telling students I'm going to assess them based on the effort they put into preparing for our meetings, meeting internal deadlines, but with sort of space for empathy when things do come up or experiments fail or what have you. And then also saying I expect a certain responsiveness to feedback. That has been enough for me. But that is also very vague. I've been very lucky that I had good relationships with good students, and it always worked out for me to keep things vague. If you want to establish stricter standards or even actually draft rubrics with the student, in advance of signing off on the prospectus, you absolutely can do that, or you can develop those later on together in a sort of ungrading or contract grading type model. There's not really a right or a wrong way there, except that we ask you to always, of course, be compassionate with your grading. The last thing I'll talk about is the prospectus, or the last two things I'll talk about, the prospectus form and who is eligible to be a mentor. So your students, you might be at the point now that a student has approached you about being mentor and has brought up this prospectus form. If not, let me go ahead and say that the form is relatively simple. We just ask for a lot of kind of logistical information about which department the student is getting their honors in, who their mentor is going to be, all that sort of good stuff. And then 4 main questions. What is the topic? What is the format or of the final product going to be? What is the work plan? So your attitude toward deadlines, your meeting. You don't have to set like specific dates for meetings, but are you going to meet weekly, monthly, every 2 weeks, that kind of thing? And then what resources the student is going to need to complete this project. And the reason we ask those questions is not to get into policing what is or is not a valid honors thesis project in any particular discipline. We don't get into the business of telling you what honors means in your department. Instead, we see this as an exercise in drafting a syllabus for the thesis itself. So the topic section sort of functions like a course description. What are we going to be covering in this thesis? What questions do we hope to answer? What topics do we hope to explore? With some students, it's going to be at that level of detail. And for others, they might already have an experimental design and a hypothesis because they've already been working in a lab, for example. So you'll see across that whole spectrum depending on the disciplines that you work in. I encourage students to think about what's personally motivating them to pursue the topic as well, so that if later on down the line you and the student need to renegotiate the topic, for perhaps it needs to be scoped down, perhaps it needs to be redirected a little bit, that you'll already have had a conversation about why the student is choosing that topic, so that you can do that redirection or that rescoping while still keeping in mind what the student really wants to get out of the project, because it is ultimately about what they're going to get out of the project, not just what it does for you or your research, even if they are very closely related. We ask about the work plan and the format of the thesis, again, very much like a grades and course schedule kind of part of a syllabus. Setting those deadlines very loosely early on can allow for structure for students who need that greater structure, but also both that and the topic are always renegotiable between you and the student. So if you get a little ways into the project and you need to completely reimagine the experiment design, for example, or the works they had originally intended to compare are not providing the kind of fruit that they wanted for their humanistic analysis, or the medium that they chose for their art project is just not proving to be the right mechanism for their creative focus at this point in time, all of that can be changed. And none of those negotiations need to come back to the Honors College unless there's a conflict between you and the student and you need an impartial party to help mediate that. And I say impartial, but maybe we are a little bit student leaning in that it is our job to help advocate for the honors students, but not to the extent of necessarily overriding what you as the mentor think is important for the project. So all of that is about laying out kind of the major thesis syllabus components. And then the resources section is about getting the student and yourself as well to stop and think about what they need access to in advance of the project. So this might be a program or a piece of software that they need to learn over the summer, so they'll be ready to jump in on a particular kind of data analysis in the fall. It might be human subjects paperwork or skills of doing particular kinds of statistical analysis or even survey design or interview design, which they want to hit the ground running on in the fall. Now, we do encourage faculty to not require students to do additional work in advance of the thesis. It is a 2-semester project, not a 2 semesters plus project. But in reality, we also acknowledge that students might already be working in your lab, or they might already be contributing to a project that you have ongoing in some way, or they just might want to get that human subjects paperwork out of the way before they start on that project. All of those are legitimate reasons to get started before they're actually in the units. But The point of that resources section is both to get you thinking about it and also to put things on our radar as a college so that we know what kind of services and other kinds of support we might be able to offer to students. So if we see a lot of prospectuses that mention I need additional support with human subjects, we can add additional workshops to our workshop schedule or other information sessions about other topics as well. So I hope that that helps clarify all of the sort of what is a thesis and how do I assess it. If you are wondering whether you are eligible to be a thesis mentor, that is ultimately up to the department the student is getting their honors in. So as I said, they have to get honors in a major or a minor. If you teach in that department in which they are majoring or minoring, then almost certainly you are eligible, especially if you are career track, continuing status, or tenure track faculty. If you are an adjunct or a staff member in the department, including if you are a research professor, we would like you to double check with the department that they approve you being an honors thesis. People's job descriptions sometimes don't include this kind of individual mentoring, and sometimes departments don't want to reward it or encourage it. We're happy to help you have that conversation if you need to, but most of the time it's going to be up to the department who is allowed to mentor an honors thesis in their majors or minors. I also want to put another asterisk on that, which is what if you're not in that major or minor? So we do have plenty of examples all over campus of faculty outside of the department mentoring honors theses in that department. And the reason might be interdisciplinarity. The student's project itself might be interdisciplinary in some way, and that faculty member might be, so let's say, disciplinarily adjacent to the home department that we're talking about, and it makes sense for them to be an advisor. I myself, as faculty in the Honors College, am not affiliated with departments out there on campus, but the divisions in which I have terminal degrees, I have advised honors theses in them because I have the academic training or it relates to my own research or both. So it is possible for the department to sign off on someone outside of the department being a thesis mentor for their students, but it is ultimately up to the department. So again, if you need us to help navigate that conversation, that you are external and interested in advising an honors thesis but don't know who to approach to get that proper approval, we can help with that conversation. But most of the time when the student approaches the department about whatever policies and procedures they have in place to register for the honors thesis, that's when they'll find out what they need to do to get approval for you. So it could literally be just as simple as having you write an email to the department chair explaining your credentials. That's, for example, what I had to do most recently. Other divisions, it's going to be a more complicated conversation. So it really just depends on the division. But again, if there's anything we can do to help, just let us know. I hope that's helpful. We appreciate you in advance considering and becoming a thesis mentor for our wonderful Frankie's honors students. It means the world to them to have your support on their projects. And if there is ever anything else I can do to help you from the faculty side when it comes to mentoring, please don't hesitate to reach out.